And today's speaker is Colin Macleod, and his topic is Developing Confidence Through Solo Extensive Speaking. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for taking the time to watch this presentation. My name is Colin Macleod. I teach at Atomi University, which is a women's university in Tokyo. And as we just said, my topic today is Developing Confidence Through Solo Extensive Speaking. To start with some context, COVID-19 happened last year, I'm sure everyone's aware of, and that threw us into a period of emergency remote teaching. For me as an English teacher, the biggest problem I had was, how am I going to teach speaking under these circumstances? Speaking was a large part of my in-person classes. So how to transition smoothly to kind of online speaking activities was a bit of a challenge. When I had to make a decision about how I was going to teach this was sort of pre-Zoom, pre-Flipgrid sort of stage. Those tools hadn't really become the go-to resources at that point. So this was kind of quite early on in the academic year. And also, if you remember, universities were being quite strict about the tech or the expectations we should have about the tech that the students had access to. So we were told, don't expect the students to have computers and don't expect them to have unlimited data access. Many of the students, or some of the students, might only have access to the data plans on their smartphones. So that really kind of created quite strong limits for us in terms of what we were able to do. A bit more background, my previous research had been about prosody. So prosody elements like pauses, changes in intonation, word stress, those kind of things. And what I had done with students in the past was I would give them a text, I would record myself reading the text, and then I would teach the students how to annotate the text. So they would mark where the pauses were, where words were stressed, where intonation changed. And then using that annotated text, they would record themselves to try to replicate the way that I had spoken. And that worked really well. It helped raise their awareness of these aspects of speech, which many of them had never noticed or studied before. Moving on to this new research through the emergency remote teaching, I decided to use video, partly to get a bit more connection with the students. But initially I wanted to continue with prosody, but maybe add pronunciation, because I would be able to see the students' faces and see the movement of their mouth. But very quickly it became clear that that was quite boring for me, quite boring for the students. I think just nitpicking about katakana pronunciation or problems with th pronunciation, it was quite tedious and not particularly helpful for the students. So I decided to pivot, and I started to focus more on these types of things. So speech production, idea formation, automaticity, and fluency. So it's very much about just taking the ideas from their head and trying to produce language smoothly. And that's basically the cool part of speaking. That's what all of the students want to be able to do, is just to produce this steady, fluent sort of flow of language. But something that they'd never really had the opportunity to study before. So that was the new kind of focus. And the way I did it, this piece of research I actually did at a university I teach at part-time. And so it was a new university for me. It was my first time teaching there. And we were using this new well, new to me, LMS. I'd used I'd used Google Drive before, but never used Google Classroom before. So a little bit nervous about how I was going to manage this, but I also made a decision that I didn't want to overload the students with different apps and websites and different things. I wanted to stay within the parameters that the university had set, and just kind of see what we could do. It was also important for me that the students had something to do. So rather than just writing or answering quizzes or listening to me in a video lecture, I wanted the students to actually produce something. So that's kind of where we ended up. This is the book that I chose to use. This is a bilingual book. The Japanese translation, or the English translation, would be things that foreigners really want to know about Japanese culture and history. And this was a really good resource to use for this activity. So basically teaching Japanese culture in English and thinking about how you can explain aspects of Japanese culture and history to foreigners, which is something that students often say they really want to do. The reason they want to learn English is to communicate with foreigners, talk to foreigners. So this was very attractive to the students. It also allowed them to kind of not worry about kind of extra linguistic knowledge. So they understood the content or many aspects of, or many parts of the book. They already had ideas, they already had a little bit of knowledge of many of the topics in here. So for that reason, it just gave them a lot of confidence in terms of engaging with the topics. You know, they had opinions, they had previous experience that they could refer to. And they found it really enjoyable to use. And they even learned quite a lot. It was surprising some of the things that they didn't know, but I do recommend this book. So how I used it, I set up a basic, Google Classroom activity. So in Google Classroom, sometimes you can use docs and forms and you can do quite advanced things. What I did was just a very, very simple basic activity with very simple instructions. So you can see, what did you learn from this lesson? Make notes to plan what you want to say, but don't read from a script. So what sometimes happened is that students would write a script and they would just read it. But that was not the goal of this activity. So what I would ask the students to do is take a little post-it note and just note maybe 3 or 4 points that they wanted to write about, so that they never forgot kind of what they wanted to say. But they weren't allowed to write sentences. They weren't allowed to script what they wanted to say. So it really was about kind of producing language on the fly, which it does take time for them to kind of get comfortable with. Initially, they think they need to give perfect sentences, but it takes a little bit of negotiation to get them used to relaxing and actually producing language on the fly. Oh, sorry. A little bit of advice that I gave to the students. Number one, record your video in a landscape orientation. So put the camera to the side, and also rest your phone on the desk, maybe prop it up with a cup or a book or something. And that just gives a little bit of space, more horizontal space that the students can gesture with. It also means they don't need to think about holding the phone and keeping themselves in the picture. And also as a teacher, you get a little bit sick of watching wobbly handheld video. So partly for their benefit, partly for my benefit. And I also suggested that they maybe practice once or twice before they do their final recording, just to give them a little bit of confidence that they were actually able to produce their ideas. And I asked the students how long it took them to complete this part of the class, and they said about 15 to 20 minutes, which I think is a reasonable amount of time to ask from the students. So in terms of feedback, the grading that I graded all of the recordings, and 4 basic components for their grade. Grammar and vocabulary was one. Thinking, which is very subjective. It's, do I think that the students have really thought about the topic, or are they just giving me a kind of surface level rehash of what was in the book? So are they able to actually take ideas and kind of mix them together and produce something a bit different to what was in the book? So again, a little bit subjective, which I guess is problematic in some ways, but I think it's important that they understood that this was a requirement, you know, to think a bit more deeply. Pronunciation and prosody was one part, and then fluency was another part. So fluency in terms of, were they able to kind of produce long utterances between pauses? Were the pauses in suitable positions, or were the pauses just kind of randomly dropped in? Pausing is a very important aspect of speech. And if pauses are not used appropriately, it can really negatively affect communication. So those are some of the things that I look for in terms of fluency. So in terms of how I gave feedback, I developed what I think is quite an effective system. So what I would do is, on one side of my screen, I would have the recording from the previous week, including the grade that I had given the student, plus the comments, any comments that I'd given them. And then on the right-hand side of my screen, I would have this week's recording. So that really helped me have good continuity. I could see what I had told the student the previous week, and then I could check with this week's recording if they had actually implemented any of those things, or were they just making the same mistakes without actually moving forward. So I found that to be very good. I think it really helped the students feel like I was really holding them accountable as well. So that worked quite well. In terms of actual feedback, there were 2 types of feedback that I would give. One would be written comments for each individual student. And the way I would do that is typically just press the function key twice on my keyboard. It brings up the dictate tool, and then I would speak into the computer. So I was able to produce quite extensive feedback relatively quickly. The other type of feedback I would give would be video feedback. So as I was going through the recordings, I would just have a little kind of notebook, and I would be noting down things that I thought might be useful to tell the whole class. Maybe there was some words or phrases that the class as a whole were struggling with, or maybe just something interesting that one student had made a mistake with that I thought other people should know about. So that video was typically 5 or 10 minutes, and I would share that with them through Google Classroom. So 2 types of feedback that I would give to the students. So evaluation from the students, they all felt that this activity improved their speaking ability. So all students, there was 27 students in this group. And the things that they picked out were confidence, their confidence improved, their ability to just produce language and speak improved. Their attitude towards English improved, which I think related to what I was saying earlier. This is the kind of the cool, fun part of language. If they can actually develop this skill, they really feel like they're doing it, like they're really using the language. And of course, their ability to speak for an extended period of time improved. Unsurprisingly, that's what the focus of this task really was. Another thing they really enjoyed was the fact that they had a video record of their speech. So they could look at weeks 1 and 2 and compare it with weeks 14 and 15. And if you're not recording speech, then you never have access to that improvement. Students can make huge improvement across the semester, but they've got no record of how poor they were, if you like, at the start of the semester. So having the video recording is very helpful. They also said that they liked the fact that the videos were private, that they weren't available for their peers to watch. I've done some work with Flipgrid with some of my classes, and it's very clear that they understand that these videos are available for their peers to watch. So it kind of makes them a bit more stressed, a bit more anxious perhaps. But these private videos, I really sensed that the students were more relaxed and just willing to try and kind of struggle through all the pauses. Whereas on a Flipgrid video, they would really start to stress knowing that their classmates might see this. They also appreciated the individual written feedback, helped with their motivation. Again, they felt that they were being kind of held accountable. And it helped them to take these small steps forward each week. Usually I would just pick out a couple of things that I thought the students could improve, which is enough for them to manage when it comes to recording the next video in the following week. And they also enjoyed the class-wide video feedback that I recorded, mainly because in terms of aspects of speech, it's much easier for me to explain those to them with a video rather than writing a paragraph. Just that sort of instant ability to understand it was very helpful. Okay, so just to kind of wrap things up, this was certainly time consuming. There's no denying that, even with a relatively normal size of 27 students. But I definitely feel like it was a good return on investment for me and for the students. The classes were asynchronous, so there was no live video component. So I felt like I had to give a bit more for the students to feel like they were getting a good bang for their buck in that sense. So yeah, I wasn't having to commute, so I didn't mind kind of putting a bit more effort into this. Under normal teaching circumstances, I wouldn't do this every week. I might do it every second week, just because it is quite time consuming. But I think it's definitely valuable. The other thing which really became very clear to me was that this is not conversation practice. And I think it's important to understand that conversation is very different. It's a different skill. I'm guilty as a teacher guilty of basically saying to the students, okay, talk to your partner, small group, talk to each other, and you think they're doing speaking practice. Conversation is much more complicated than just speaking. And I think it's important that we give the students a chance to speak first, kind of get used to producing language to a point where they become confident, and then perhaps introducing the challenge of conversation, turn-taking, paralinguistic aspects of conversation. I think it's okay, and I think it's important to actually separate these two activities. Confidence. Many students had never tried this, and the fact that they could see that they can actually do it, you know, with a bit of effort, I think they took a lot of value from that. This semester, what I'm doing differently is I'm focusing more on the automaticity side of things. So helping the students identify chunks of language that hopefully they can memorize and kind of have in their memories to call on in order to produce nice kind of chunks of language. I didn't do much of that last semester. I kind of hoped that it would appear naturally, but I think this semester, picking out some phrases to teach the students, I think would be important. Okay, that's just about everything I have to say. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.